Beauty? What is beauty? Is it nature? Is it art? Or is it people? The philosopher Immanuel Kant once said in a very excited spirit between some friends, "Beautiful is what pleases universally without a concept." "Nonsense," said probably one of his friends. "How can something be universal but without a concept?" Meanwhile, in France, the poet René Char, while drinking a cappuccino in a brasserie with his friend Camus, says, "In our darkness there is no room for beauty. All the room is for beauty." Another nonsense. How can there be no room and at the same time be all the room? These quotes seem absurd, but only because we are not yet understanding their profound meaning. In this video, we are going to deal with a very urgent problem of our time: saving our world. Some of you may think that it's crazy, that our world is not in danger and it doesn't need to be saved, or that maybe it's impossible to save it, especially with such an enigmatic concept like beauty. Well, you might be right, but philosophy often begins with what seems impossible. And so I will attempt to explain, through a deep analysis of some crazy philosophers and poets like Kant, Dostoevsky, Rimbaud, and others, how today beauty remains the strongest hope against the darkness of our times. Let's begin with the philosopher Immanuel Kant and consider his definition of beauty in the Critique of Judgment. In the way Kant sets up his theory of aesthetic judgment, he faces a major difficulty. When he attempts to define the essence of the beautiful, he has to deal with the language of an older metaphysical tradition, which is full of contradictions. Let's take a closer look at one definition that is especially relevant to us. Beautiful is what pleases universally without a concept. Let us pause for a moment on this expression. Doesn't it sound problematic? How can something please universally and not be a concept? Normally, when something is universal, it's because we can explain it with a rule, a definition, or a concept that applies to everyone. But Kant says beautiful is universally pleasing without any concept. Kant is basically saying beauty has no logical definition, no essence you can pin down. And yet, it somehow carries a demand for universal assent. In order to understand what Kant truly means, let us go through the two key words associated to beautiful: pleasure and universal. To please universally, or universal pleasure, appears to us as a contradiction. Indeed, by the word pleasure, we usually mean something subjective. For example, enjoying chocolate. It would sound strange to say, everyone must share my pleasure and therefore must like chocolate. Pleasure, by nature, seems private, individual. Our common way of intending pleasure, according to Kant, is by associating it to the word satisfaction, which in German is Vergnügen. In this word, we should be able to hear the sound of the root genug, which means enough. That is, I'm satisfied when I had enough. So, while satisfaction is limited to the individual who experiences it, because what is experienced feels enough, pleasure in the sense of the beautiful is different. It does not stay locked inside a single individual. In the very act of experiencing beauty, the person is lifted beyond their private self. They remain who they are, of course, but they no longer feel like just an isolated individual. More precisely, in the presence of beautiful, the human beings, without ceasing to be who they are, cease to be mere individuals. Keep this in mind while we go once more on Kantian's expression. Beautiful is what pleases universally without a concept. Let us now turn to the other problematic term, namely universally. If we remain within the framework of traditional metaphysical language, the word universal is commonly used as the whole or the totality. In other words, the sum of all the individual parts. So if we apply that idea here, Kant's claim would seem to mean beauty is what pleases universally because everyone, when asked, happens to agree on it. The universal would then be nothing more than the agreement of many individual opinions. But this is a deeply mistaken interpretation of the word universal, one that prevents us from fully grasping the meaning of Kant's statement. So, what does it mean? The word universal comes from the Latin universalis. Among the Romans, for example in Quintilian, It was used to translate the Greek term katholikon. This Greek word has actually survived unchanged into the modern language, in the adjective Catholic. So how did the Greeks understand the word Catholic? Let us consider for a moment one of the founders of the Western thought, Aristotle. To begin with, Aristotle himself never actually uses the noun katholikon. Instead, he relies on the adverb katholo, which plays a key role in his philosophy. He uses it to describe the philosophical gaze, that is, a way of seeing that is directed toward the whole, or toward the reality in its entirety. If we open the excellent etymological dictionary of the Latin language, we discover something important. In the entry for universus, we read, turned entirely in a single motion toward. This tells us something crucial. It shows us that in the word universus, the prefix uni doesn't merely indicate the object of the gaze, the whole itself, but rather the way in which the gaze directed, entirely as a single movement without division. So, what does the Latin word universus really tell us at its deepest level? It explains us how we direct ourselves towards something when our focus is universal. The gaze is, in this sense, in one piece, that is complete, undivided, and fully attentive. What does this teach us, especially when we consider Aristotle's idea of the philosophical gaze? According to Aristotle, the only way to truly adopt a philosophical perspective is to direct ourselves entirely toward the whole. The focus must be complete in a single, uninterrupted motion, embracing the whole as a whole. Let's take a moment to summarize what we've seen so far. First, pleasure in the sense of the beautiful is de-individualizing. It lifts us beyond our private isolated self. Second, the universal is not just a collective agreement, but a relationship. It describes a gaze that engages the whole person and a whole that includes that gaze. With this understanding, we can return to Kant's famous statement. Beautiful is what pleases universally without a concept. So what does this really mean? Let us attempt an interpretation. In the presence of the beautiful, the human being is entirely himself. We have finally reached the point referred to the title of this video. It is a phrase by Dostoevsky, spoken in his great novel The Idiot. The line is spoken by a character who addresses Prince Mishkin with the following words. Is it true, Prince, that you once said beauty will save the world? The prince is the idiot who gives the novel its title. The Greek word idiotes originally didn't mean someone of low intelligence how we intend it today. Instead, it described a private citizen or a person who was not involved in public affairs or politics. This was seen as a negative trait in ancient Greece, where active participation in the city-state's life was highly valued. Over time, the meaning evolved to imply someone who lacks knowledge or skill, particularly in public life, eventually leading to its modern, more insulting connotation. Dostoevsky uses this term ironically to ask a profound philosophical question. What would happen if a truly good and innocent person were placed in a corrupt and selfish society? At the beginning of the novel, in a conversation at General Epanchi's house, the prince is almost put on a trial, questioned to see whether he is fit for polite society. During this exchange, he says, "Beauty is difficult to judge. I'm not ready for it yet. Beauty is an enigma." First of all, it's not a coincidence that Kant talks about beauty in his text titled Critique of Judgment. What Dostoevsky is trying to say is that beauty is impossible to judge, because it resists being measured or categorized. And this resistance, this impossibility of judgment, is precisely what makes it an enigma. And perhaps that's the essence of an enigma. It remains mysterious even when everything else around it has been explained. So how should we approach not only the enigma of beauty itself, but also the second, deepest enigma that Dostoevsky places in Prince Mishkin's mouth? Beauty will save the world. In other words, how can we attempt to understand the fundamental role of beauty with regard to the salvation of the world? What is our situation today? It is that of nihilism. Nihilism is the loss of any higher ground for truth, meaning, or morality, a loss that shakes both culture as a whole and the human being as an individual. When nihilism was for the first time explicitly formulated by authors such as Nietzsche and Dostoevsky, it was a danger approaching but not fully established. Today, however, nihilism is firmly installed everywhere, and its most dangerous form is also its most apparently harmless one, the global uniformity. We usually hear the term globalization used to describe the rationalization of the global economy, the integration of markets, the spread of technology, the efficiency of supply chains, etc. On the surface, it sounds like a progress, but this term should make us think. Globalization, indeed, is much more radical. It marks the disappearance of the world as a whole, hidden behind the totality of what is merely real. What does this mean? In the age of completed nihilism, the human being is no longer orientated by truth, meaning, or transcendence. Instead, he is completely absorbed by the real, by data, facts, resources that can be mobilized, quantified, and managed. Reality becomes nothing more than what can be calculated and used. This is the condition we live, a true eclipse of the world. In such a condition, our world no longer means the open whole of places, horizons, and relationships of which we are always only a part. Instead, world is reduced to the mere space of reality, a reality that human seeks to occupy and dominate completely. In doing so, we betray our own nature, for we are not meant to consume the whole, but to dwell within it. This age, our own, is a nocturnal time. In a letter dated December 2nd, 1802, the poet Hölderlin named what he believed to be the defining trait of modern humanity: sobriety. The German word he uses, Nüchternheit, carries a resonance with the Latin nocturnus, meaning nightly or belonging to the night. Hölderlin writes, "Sobriety is the rule of life that prevails when night falls." What does this mean? For Hölderlin, sobriety is not about avoiding excess or being moderated. Rather, it marks the condition of living in an age where the light has disappeared. And by light here I mean a clear sense of meaning, purpose, and spiritual presence that once guided humanity. Night has fallen, and we are left in a state of sobriety. And this is why Hölderlin calls our age nocturnal. We live without the guiding radiance that once gave human life orientation. In such a time, existence feels dry, rationalized, dominated by logic. And yet, it is precisely in this nocturnal condition that poets and artists feel the darkness most keenly, and attempt to give it voice. Their task is not to dispel the night, but to reveal what it means to live within it. Among modern poets, perhaps no one experienced this nocturnal reality more intensely than the French poet René Char. In the collection he dedicated to his friend Albert Camus, he leaves us with the following aphorism: "In our darkness there is no room for beauty. All the room is for beauty." At first glance, this aphorism sounds like a paradox. Beauty, no room, and all the room. But behind it there is a profound meaning. Let's explain it. The darkness Char is talking about is our age, a time of despair, violence, and nihilism. He says that in this darkness there is no place for beauty, in the sense that beauty in our age seems irrelevant, meaningless. Yet, it is precisely in this darkness that beauty becomes the essential condition to save the world. In other words, beauty doesn't need a place like other things. It's not an element among many others in the world. Rather, it is what gives meaning to the whole. Even if it seems banished, beauty actually occupies everything. So, it's time to put together all the information we've seen so far and try to answer this question. How can beauty save the world? First of all, why must the world be saved? Is the world in danger? Well, strictly speaking, the world cannot be in danger because it's not a thing, nor the sum of all things. What can happen to the world is more radical. It can disappear. Thus, to save the world does not mean to protect or secure it as if it were an object that could be safeguarded. It means to prevent its disappearance, to preserve the very openness in which human beings can dwell, relate, and find meaning. The word save comes from Latin salvus, which is linked to the Greek word holos, which in its neutral form to holon means the whole. You might recall that this is the same expression from which the Latin universus comes, meaning the whole as entirety. So if we want to understand the word salvus and therefore what it really means to save, we need to think in terms of wholeness. To save is not first of all to rescue or protect, but rather to make entire or the whole again. The world can only be saved under one condition. Let us say it in Latin, on the condition of being universalis, not universal, in the modern sense of uniformity. Rather, universalis in its original sense, entire, directed in a single movement toward the whole. Let's leave the word to a poet who deeply understood the nature of beauty, Baudelaire. Let it not displease the too profound sophists who have thrown their science from books, and though my idea may be delicate and hard to express, I do not despair of succeeding. Beauty is strange. The French word bizarre is more helpful than the English word strange for understanding beauty. While strange usually just means something that doesn't fit in, bizarre suggests a more profound sense of dislocation or rupture, a radical break from what we expect. It describes an encounter that strikes us so powerfully it disrupts our normal way of seeing things. This is the nature of beauty. Earlier we said that sobriety is the rule of life that governs when night falls. In the night, things blur together and differences start to fade. To be impious in such a nocturnal time means to stop caring about distinctions, to no longer tell apart what, before our very eyes, is merging into indistinction. Sobriety, or as Hölderlin calls it, holy sobriety, is the opposite. It's the vigilance, the effort to keep a clear gaze, precisely when clarity seems impossible. To keep making distinctions in the midst of darkness. This is what Hölderlin means by piety. And the result of this clear gaze, the result of piety is the purity. This is why Hölderlin writes, purity, however, is also beauty. Or in German, Reinheit aber ist auch Schönheit. What does this mean? In an age of nihilism, where everything tends to blur together, the act of keeping things pure, of maintaining their differentiation, is already beauty. I conclude this video with the words of the French poet Rimbaud. At the end of Alchemy of the Word, he writes, "All that is behind me. Today I know how to greet beauty." Nihilism, indeed, can be surpassed. To know how to greet beauty means to keep whole and intact in all its purity the hidden harmony in which the heart of the world beats. Thank you for watching this video. I'm Ivan and this is Empyrean, the Academy of Philosophy and Fine Arts.